Hello friends, about the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed. And I would be really happy if you do so. Also don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you. Okay, so I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of freaking out right now. I'm sitting here in my tent, miles deep in the Appalachian Mountains, and it's pitch black outside. Like, can't see your hand in front of your face black. I can hear all kinds of weird noises, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, owls hooting like they're trying to summon Satan himself. And every time I close my eyes, I keep seeing those stupid campfire stories the other hikers told me. You know the ones I'm talking about, right? Skinwalkers. Those creepy, shape-shifting creatures that supposedly roam these woods. Yeah, total BS if you ask me. I mean, come on, who actually believes in that stuff? Well, I didn't, until now. See, I'm the kind of guy who likes to prove things for himself. I don't just take people's word for it. So when I kept hearing all these spooky stories about the Appalachians, I decided to come check it out for myself. Figured I'd hike a few trails, camp out under the stars, and prove that there's nothing to be afraid of. Yeah, famous last words, right? The first couple of days were actually pretty awesome. The scenery was amazing, towering trees, cascading waterfalls, the whole 9 yards. I didn't see another soul for miles, which was exactly what I wanted. Just me, nature, and the open trail. But then things started to get weird. I kept finding these strange tracks in the mud, huge footprints that looked like they belonged to something walking on 2 legs. And I swear I saw something moving in the shadows a couple of times, something tall and lanky with glowing red eyes. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the more time I spent in those woods, the more uneasy I felt. It was like something was watching me, following me, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now here I am, huddled in my tent, praying that whatever's out there doesn't decide to pay me a visit tonight. The next day, I packed up my gear and hit the trail. I figured the best way to shake off that creepy feeling was to keep moving, you know? But the deeper I got into the woods, the weirder things got. The trees seemed to grow taller, closer together, blocking out the sunlight. The air grew thick and heavy, like it was filled with unseen eyes watching my every move. I started to regret coming here alone. Should have brought a buddy, or at least told someone where I was going. But hey, hindsight is 20/20, right? Around midday, I stumbled across a group of hikers taking a break by a stream. They were an older couple and a younger guy, probably their son. They looked pretty rattled, like they'd seen a ghost or something. "You folks all right?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The older woman jumped like I'd startled her. "Oh, you scared us," she said, her voice shaky. "We thought we were alone out here." "Yeah, well, this is a pretty popular trail," I said, even though I hadn't seen another person in 2 days. "Not this deep it isn't," the younger guy muttered, giving me a wary look. "You guys seen anything unusual?" I asked, trying to get a read on them. The older man exchanged a nervous glance with his wife. "We heard some strange noises last night," he said slowly. howling like a pack of wolves, but different. And there were these whispers. We couldn't make out the words, but they seemed to be coming from all around us. "Just the wind," I said dismissively, though I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Maybe," the woman said, but she didn't sound convinced. But we also saw something moving in the trees. Something tall and dark, with long limbs. I tried to laugh it off. "Probably just a bear," I said. "There are black bears in these woods, you know." The younger guy snorted. "That wasn't no bear, man. Bears don't move like that." I didn't press them further. Something told me they weren't going to tell me anything else. We exchanged a few more pleasantries, then I continued on my way. But their words stuck with me, echoing in my mind like a bad omen. As the sun began to set, I found a clearing and set up camp. I tried to tell myself that those hikers were just messing with me, trying to scare the city slicker. But the truth was, their stories had planted a seed of doubt in my mind. And now, every little sound, the crackling of the fire, the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, sent a jolt of fear through me. I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, there was something to those skinwalker legends after all. I found a decent spot to camp for the night, a small clearing hidden amongst a cluster of thick pine trees. I set up my tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and tried to relax. But the encounter with the hikers had rattled me. Their fear was contagious, and now I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As darkness fell, the forest came alive with a symphony of sounds. The wind howled through the trees, branches creaked and groaned, and unseen creatures rustled in the undergrowth. Every snap and crackle made me jump, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to distract myself by reading a book, but the words swam before my eyes. I tried listening to music, but the melodies sounded distorted and eerie. I even tried counting sheep, but all I could picture were those glowing red eyes I'd seen in the shadows. Finally, I gave up and lay there in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the forest. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The air was thick with tension, like a coiled spring waiting to snap. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see for myself. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent flap. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face, and I shivered involuntarily. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the clearing, but there was nothing there. Just trees, shadows, and the faint glow of the moon through the branches. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. Then I heard it. A faint rustling sound, coming from the edge of the clearing. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. The rustling grew louder, closer. Something was moving out there in the darkness. I raised my flashlight, pointing it towards the sound. The beam danced across the trees, but I couldn't see anything. Then, for a split second, I caught a glimpse of something moving between the trunks. It was tall and slender, with long, thin limbs. And it was moving towards me. I panicked. I dropped my flashlight, scrambling back into the tent and zipping it shut. I huddled in my sleeping bag, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear the creature moving around outside, circling the tent. It was close, too close. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening to the creature pacing back and forth. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. I just waited, hoping it would go away. Finally, the sounds faded. The creature was gone. I lay there in the darkness, trembling with fear. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't alone in those woods. When the first rays of sunlight finally pierced through the trees, I cautiously unzipped the tent. My body was stiff and sore from lying in the same position all night, and my eyes felt gritty and bloodshot. But more than anything, I was exhausted, emotionally and physically drained. I emerged from the tent, blinking in the sudden brightness. The clearing looked different in the daylight, somehow less menacing. But the fear from the night before still lingered, a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I scanned the area, searching for any sign of the creature. There were no footprints, no disturbed leaves, no indication that anything had been there at all. Had I imagined it all? Was it just a product of my overactive imagination and the spooky stories I'd heard? I wasn't sure what to believe anymore. I decided to pack up my camp and move on. I needed to get out of those woods, find some civilization, some sense of normalcy. But as I was gathering my things, I noticed something strange. There, on the trunk of a nearby tree, were deep, parallel scratches. They were too high for any animal I could think of to have made them. And they were fresh, the bark still oozing sap. My blood ran cold. Whatever had been circling my tent last night was real. And it was big, strong enough to tear into a tree trunk like it was nothing. I quickly finished packing my gear, my hands shaking with fear. I slung my backpack over my shoulders and hurried away from the clearing, not wanting to risk another encounter with whatever had made those marks. As I hiked, I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see the creature emerge from the trees at any moment. But there was nothing. Just the endless expanse of forest, stretching out in every direction. I tried to focus on the trail, on putting one foot in front of the other. But my mind kept replaying the events of the night before. The rustling sounds, the glimpse of the creature in the shadows, the feeling of being watched. I was starting to lose it. I was starting to believe that I was going to die in those woods, alone and forgotten. I hiked for hours, driven by a raw, primal fear. The woods seemed to stretch on forever, an endless maze of trees and shadows. I was lost, disoriented, and utterly alone. The silence was broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the crunching of leaves beneath my boots. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I heard a sound that stopped me in my tracks. It was a faint cry, a desperate wail that echoed through the trees. It sounded human. My first instinct was to run, to get as far away from that sound as possible. But something held me back. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was a misplaced sense of duty, or maybe it was just plain stupidity. Whatever it was, I found myself drawn towards the cries, following the sound deeper into the woods. The cries grew louder as I approached, and I could now make out words. Someone was calling for help, their voice filled with terror and pain. I pushed through a thicket of bushes and emerged into a small clearing. And that's when I saw him. He was a young guy, maybe in his early 20s, lying on the ground with his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. His face was contorted in agony, and he was sobbing uncontrollably. "Help me," he cried out when he saw me. "Please, help me." I rushed over to him, kneeling down beside him. "What happened?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I fell," he gasped, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "I was hiking, and I slipped and fell. I think my leg is broken." I examined his leg. It was definitely broken, the bone protruding at a sickening angle. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Okay, don't worry," I said, trying to reassure him. "I'm going to help you." But as I looked around the clearing, a sense of unease settled over me. There was something off about this place. The trees seemed to press in closer than usual, the air thick with an oppressive silence. And there was a strange, metallic scent hanging in the air, like blood. I glanced back at the injured hiker. His eyes were wide with fear, and he was staring past me, at something in the woods behind me. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. He just kept staring, his eyes filled with a terror I'd never seen before. And then, I heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural, coming from the shadows behind me. I slowly turned my head, my heart pounding in my chest. And that's when I saw it. Standing at the edge of the clearing, its eyes glowing in the dim light, was the creature. It was like something out of a nightmare. The creature stood there, bathed in the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. It was tall and gaunt, its skin a sickly pale gray. Its limbs were long and spindly, ending in sharp claws that scraped against the ground. But it was the creature's face that truly horrified me. It was a grotesque mockery of a human face, with sunken eyes that glowed with an eerie yellow light, a gaping maw filled with jagged teeth, and a long, pointed snout that twitched with every breath. I froze, paralyzed by fear. My mind screamed at me to run, to flee for my life, but my body refused to obey. I was trapped, caught in the creature's hypnotic gaze. The injured hiker screamed again, his voice high-pitched and desperate. The sound broke the spell, jolting me back to reality. I stumbled backward, my eyes still fixed on the creature. It took a step towards us, its claws digging into the soft earth. "Run!" I yelled, finally finding my voice. "Run!" I turned and sprinted away from the clearing, the hiker's screams echoing behind me. I didn't look back, didn't dare to see if the creature was following. I just ran, blindly, desperately, fueled by pure adrenaline. The forest blurred around me, a kaleidoscope of green and brown. Branches whipped at my face, thorns tore at my clothes, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The creature was out there, somewhere in the darkness, and it was hunting me. I stumbled and fell, scraping my hands and knees on the rough ground. But I quickly scrambled back to my feet and continued running. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I pushed myself harder, knowing that my life depended on it. I didn't know how long I ran, but eventually, the sounds of pursuit faded. I slowed to a walk, gasping for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion. I looked around, trying to orient myself, but the forest looked the same in every direction. I was lost, alone, and terrified. But at least, for the moment, I was alive. I collapsed onto the forest floor, my body spent, my mind reeling. The adrenaline that had fueled my escape was gone, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and a gnawing sense of despair. I was lost, alone, and hunted. And I had no idea what to do. I lay there for a long time, just listening to the sounds of the forest. The wind whispered through the trees, birds chirped, and insects buzzed. It was a peaceful scene, a stark contrast to the horror I had just witnessed. But the peace was an illusion. I knew that the creature was still out there, somewhere in the vast wilderness, and that it would be back. I had to get out of those woods. But which way should I go? I had no compass, no map, no sense of direction. Every path looked the same, every tree an identical sentinel in an endless green army. I tried to retrace my steps, but it was hopeless. I had been running blindly, panicking, and now I had no idea where I was or how I had gotten there. The forest had swallowed me whole, and I was lost in its depths. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor, a wave of panic washed over me. I couldn't spend another night in those woods. Not with that creature lurking in the darkness. I forced myself to my feet and started walking, choosing a direction at random. I stumbled through the undergrowth, my clothes snagged on thorns, my skin scratched by branches. I was exhausted, hungry, and thirsty, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving. As darkness fell, the forest transformed into a menacing labyrinth. The trees loomed like grotesque figures, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The shadows deepened, concealing unseen dangers. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the hoot of an owl, sent a shiver down my spine. I felt a growing sense of hopelessness. I was never going to get out of those woods. I was going to die there, alone and forgotten. The creature would find me, and it would. I didn't want to think about what it would do. I stumbled through the darkness, my flashlight beam a weak beacon in the oppressive gloom. The batteries were dying, the light flickering and fading, threatening to plunge me into complete darkness. I fumbled in my backpack for spares, my fingers clumsy with fear and cold. No luck. Just my luck. I pressed on, the darkness closing in around me like a suffocating blanket. The forest seemed to hold its breath, every creature silent, as if waiting for something. Waiting for me? Then I heard it. A faint sound, almost imperceptible at first, but growing steadily louder. It was a rhythmic crunching, like footsteps on dry leaves. Someone else was out there. My heart leaped with a mixture of hope and fear. Was it another hiker? A rescuer? Or was it something else? I stopped, holding my breath, straining to hear over the pounding of my own heart. The footsteps continued, coming closer. They were slow, deliberate, heavy. Not the light steps of a human. Panic seized me. I turned and ran, crashing through the undergrowth, heedless of the branches that tore at my clothes and the thorns that ripped at my skin. I had to get away, had to put as much distance between myself and those footsteps as possible. But the footsteps followed, relentless, unhurried. They were always there, just behind me, a constant reminder of the unseen pursuer. I glanced over my shoulder, my flashlight beam momentarily illuminating the path behind me. Nothing. Just the dark, silent trees. But the footsteps continued, closer now, almost upon me. I risked another glance. And that's when I saw them. Two glowing eyes, yellow and malevolent, staring at me from the darkness. They were low to the ground, almost at the level of my knees. And they were moving with the footsteps, keeping pace with my frantic flight. I screamed, a primal cry of terror that echoed through the silent forest. I stumbled and fell, my flashlight slipping from my grasp and tumbling into the darkness. I scrambled to my feet, my hands outstretched, blindly searching for the lost light. But it was too late. The footsteps were upon me, and the glowing eyes were inches away. I scrambled backward, my hands scraping against the rough forest floor. The glowing eyes were right in front of me now, inches away. I could feel the creature's hot, fetid breath on my face, smell the rank stench of its fur. Fear choked me, a suffocating terror that threatened to overwhelm me. I thrashed and kicked, a cornered animal fighting for its life. But it was no use. The creature was too strong, too fast. It lunged, its claws raking across my chest, tearing through my clothes and into my flesh. I cried out in pain, the sound swallowed by the dense woods. I tried to push it away, but its grip was like iron. It dragged me to my feet, its claws digging into my shoulders. I looked into its eyes, those glowing yellow orbs that seemed to pierce my very soul. There was no intelligence there, no malice, just a cold, predatory hunger. It opened its maw, revealing rows of jagged teeth, stained with blood. I could see its tongue, long and serpentine, flicking in and out. The stench of its breath was overpowering, a nauseating mix of decay and rot. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. I braced myself for the searing pain of its teeth tearing into my flesh, the crushing weight of its jaws snapping my bones. But the attack never came. I opened my eyes, cautiously. The creature was still there, its eyes still fixed on me, but it hadn't moved. It was as if it were frozen in place, a statue carved from shadow and fear. Then I heard it. A sound that cut through the silence like a knife. A low, guttural growl, coming from behind the creature. It turned its head, slowly, its eyes still fixed on me. And then, with a speed that belied its size, it lunged into the darkness. I was alone again. I stood there, frozen, my breath caught in my throat. The creature was gone, vanished into the darkness as quickly as it had appeared. But the growl that had sent it fleeing still echoed in my ears, a deep, guttural sound that spoke of immense power and primal rage. What was out there? What could terrify a creature like that? The question hung in the air, unanswered, adding another layer of fear to the already suffocating atmosphere. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a desperate need to escape, to get as far away from the place as possible. I turned and ran, blindly, stumbling over roots and rocks, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The forest was alive with unseen dangers, and I was caught in its web. I burst out of the trees into a small clearing. And that's when I saw it. A figure, standing in the center of the clearing, bathed in the pale moonlight. It was tall and imposing, its outline shrouded in shadow. But I could see its eyes, 2 points of light that burned with an eerie intensity. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest. Who was it? Was it another hiker? A rescuer? Or was it something else? The figure took a step towards me, and the shadows fell away, revealing its form. It was human, or at least humanoid. But there was something wrong, something off about its proportions. Its limbs were too long, its torso too short, its head too large. And its eyes, those eyes were not human. They were black, bottomless pits that seemed to absorb all light. I stumbled backward, my voice caught in my throat. The figure continued to approach, its movements slow and deliberate. I could feel its gaze on me, a palpable weight that pressed down on my chest, stealing my breath. I turned to flee, but it was too late. The figure was upon me, its long arms reaching out, encircling me in a cold, suffocating embrace. I struggled, but it was no use. Its grip was like iron, unbreakable. It lifted me off the ground, its face inches from mine. I could smell its breath, a foul, earthy odor that made my stomach churn. And then it spoke. Its voice was a low growl, deep and resonant, like the rumble of distant thunder. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. There was no escape. I've always been a bit of a lone wolf. Not in a creepy, antisocial way, but I just really enjoy my own company. Especially when I'm out in nature. So, naturally, solo hiking trips are my jam. This time, I decided to tackle a less traveled section of the Appalachian Trail. I heard stories, whispers of how rugged and isolated it was, and that just made it even more appealing to me. I set off on a crisp fall morning, backpack loaded, boots laced tight, and a map tucked in my pocket. Old school, I know, but I liked the feel of it. The trailhead was practically deserted, which was exactly what I wanted. Just me, the trees, and the sound of my own footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves. Bliss. The first few hours were uneventful, the kind of peaceful solitude I craved. Sunlight filtering through the canopy, the occasional rustle of a squirrel in the undergrowth, the steady rhythm of my own breathing. It was perfect. I stopped for lunch by a small stream, just soaking in the quiet beauty of it all. As the afternoon wore on, the trail got steeper, the woods denser. The light started to fade, casting long, eerie shadows. I knew I'd have to find a place to camp soon, but I wanted to push on a little further, see what lay around the next bend. Finally, I found a decent spot, a small clearing tucked away from the main trail, sheltered by a thick stand of pines. I set up my tent, gathered some firewood, and cooked a simple meal over the campfire. As darkness settled in, The woods came alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures. Owls hooting, crickets chirping, the occasional distant howl that sent shivers down my spine. But hey, that's part of the thrill, right? Being alone in the wilderness, feeling that primal connection to nature. I settled into my sleeping bag, the crackling fire providing a comforting warmth and light. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. But I brushed it off as paranoia, just the overactive imagination of a city dweller alone in the woods. Little did I know, the real terror was yet to come. I woke up with a jolt, heart pounding. It was still dark, the fire reduced to glowing embers. Something had stirred me from sleep, a sound, a guttural growl, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It echoed through the stillness of the night, sending chills down my spine. I strained my ears, listening intently. The growling continued, interspersed with a series of high-pitched yelps and howls. It sounded like a pack of animals, but there was something off about it, something unsettling and primal. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was probably just coyotes or wolves, but deep down, a sense of dread was creeping in. The sounds grew closer, circling my campsite. I could hear the rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs, as if something heavy was moving through the undergrowth. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hand shaking as I switched it on. The beam danced across the trees, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. The feeling of being watched intensified. I felt exposed, vulnerable in my flimsy tent. I zipped the door closed, my breath catching in my throat. The growls and howls reached a fever pitch, right outside my tent. I could feel the vibrations in the ground, the creature's hot breath on the thin nylon fabric. Then, as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. An eerie silence descended, broken only by the crackling of the dying fire. I held my breath, listening for any movement, any sign of the creature. But there was nothing. Slowly, cautiously, I unzipped the tent and peered out. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but the dense trees and the faint outline of the trail. I scanned the area, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw it. A fleeting glimpse of a shadowy figure moving between the trees. It was tall and gaunt, with an unnatural gait, its eyes glowing in the darkness. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving me frozen in fear. Whatever was out there, it was no ordinary animal. Dawn broke, casting a pale light through the trees. I hadn't slept a wink. Every creak, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. I emerged from the tent, bleary-eyed and exhausted, but with a renewed sense of urgency. I needed to get out of there. I packed up my gear, my hands shaking as I rolled up the tent. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see that shadowy figure emerge from the trees. But there was nothing. Maybe it was all in my head, a product of sleep deprivation and an overactive imagination. I decided to check out the area where I heard the noises. Maybe I could find some tracks, some evidence to explain what I'd heard. I followed the trail, my senses on high alert. The woods were eerily quiet, the usual morning chorus of birds replaced by an unsettling silence. And then I saw it. A set of tracks, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. They were huge, easily twice the size of a human's, with long, clawed toes. They weren't bear tracks, or wolf tracks, or anything I could identify. They were inhuman. My blood ran cold. I followed the tracks, my heart pounding in my chest. They led me deeper into the woods, away from the trail. I came across a clearing, and what I saw there made my stomach churn. The remains of a deer lay scattered across the clearing, its carcass ripped apart in a way that no animal could have done. Bones were crushed, flesh torn away, as if by some immense force. The sight was brutal, savage. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. What kind of creature could do this? I thought back to the stories I'd heard about the Appalachian Mountains, the legends and folklore. Skinwalkers. Shape-shifting creatures said to be able to take on the form of any animal. I'd always dismissed them as superstition, but now I wasn't so sure. The tracks, the mutilated deer, the shadowy figure I'd seen in the night. It all pointed to something beyond my comprehension. Fear gripped me, a cold, primal fear I'd never experienced before. I was being hunted by something ancient, something evil. And I was completely alone. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to get back to the trail, find civilization, tell someone about this thing. But my legs felt like jelly, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. I forced myself to move, scrambling back the way I'd come. The image of the mutilated deer burned into my memory. I reached the trail and started running, my backpack bouncing against my back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't look back, didn't dare to. I just kept running, driven by pure adrenaline and terror. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The woods seemed to close in around me, the trees like silent sentinels watching my every move. I kept expecting to hear those guttural growls, to see that shadowy figure emerge from the undergrowth. Then I saw it. A flash of movement in the trees ahead. I skidded to a halt, my heart pounding in my chest. There it was again, that tall, gaunt figure, its eyes glowing in the dim light of the forest. It was blocking my path, its form shifting and changing, as if it couldn't quite decide what shape to take. I backed away slowly, my hand reaching for the hunting knife strapped to my belt. The creature mimicked my movements, its eyes never leaving mine. It was toying with me, like a cat with a mouse. I tried to make a run for it, but the creature was too fast. It darted in front of me, its form solidifying into something resembling a wolf, but larger, more menacing. Its teeth were bared in a snarl, its eyes burning with a predatory hunger. I was trapped. The creature circled me, its growls echoing through the trees. I raised my knife, my hand shaking, my heart pounding like a drum. I knew I was no match for this thing, but I was damned if I was going down without a fight. The creature lunged. And instinct took over. I ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws. I scrambled to my feet, my knife raised. The creature snarled, its hot breath on my face. I lashed out, slashing at its face with my knife. The blade connected, drawing blood. The creature howled in pain, staggering back. I pressed my attack, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I slashed again and again, the creature's blood splattering my clothes and face. But the creature was incredibly strong. It swatted me aside like a rag doll, sending me sprawling to the ground. I hit my head on a rock, the world spinning. I looked up to see the creature looming over me, its eyes filled with rage. It lunged again, its jaws snapping shut inches from my face. I managed to kick it in the chest, buying myself a precious few seconds. I scrambled back, my knife still clutched in my hand. The creature was relentless. It lunged again and again, its claws raking my arms and legs. I fought back with everything I had, but I was no match for its strength and ferocity. I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder as its claws tore through my flesh. I cried out, falling back against a tree. The creature advanced, its eyes glowing with triumph. But then, something unexpected happened. The creature hesitated, its eyes widening in surprise. It looked down at its chest, where a deep gash was oozing blood. My knife had found its mark. The creature howled in pain, its form flickering and distorting. It stumbled back, its eyes filled with confusion. I took my chance. I lunged forward, plunging my knife deep into its chest. The creature roared, its body convulsing. It staggered back, its form dissolving into a swirling mist. Then, with a final gasp, it vanished. I collapsed against the tree, my body trembling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I was alive. I had survived. But at what cost? I was covered in blood, my clothes torn, my body aching. And the image of that creature, its eyes filled with rage and pain, was burned into my memory. I had escaped, but I knew I wasn't safe. Not yet. I stumbled through the woods, my body screaming in protest. Every step sent jolts of pain through my shoulder, my legs, my head. I had to find shelter, somewhere safe to rest and regroup. I spotted a faint light through the trees, a beacon in the deepening twilight. I staggered towards it, my hopes rising with every step. As I got closer, I saw it was an old cabin, nestled amongst the trees. It looked abandoned, its windows boarded up, its roof sagging. But it was shelter, and right now, that was all that mattered. I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay. Cobwebs hummed from the rafters, and the floorboards groaned under my weight. But there was a fireplace, and a stack of firewood in the corner. I managed to get a fire going, the flames casting flickering shadows on the walls. I sank onto the floor, exhausted and relieved. I examined my wounds. The cuts on my arms and legs were deep, but not life-threatening. My shoulder was throbbing, but I could still move it. I was lucky to be alive. As I sat there, staring into the flames, the reality of what had happened started to sink in. I had encountered something that defied explanation. A creature that could shapeshift, that possessed incredible strength and resilience. A creature that had hunted me, toyed with me, tried to kill me. I thought back to the legends of the skinwalkers, the stories I had dismissed as mere folklore. Now, I wasn't so sure. Could such creatures really exist? Was I going crazy? I searched the cabin for any signs of life, any clues as to who might have lived there. I found a dusty old journal tucked away in a drawer. The entries were faded and difficult to read, but they spoke of strange encounters in the woods, of a creature that stalked the night, of missing people and unexplained deaths. The words sent chills down my spine. It wasn't just me. Others had seen it, had suffered at its hands. This creature, this thing, was a predator, a menace that had haunted these woods for years. And now, I was caught in its web. Night fell, and the darkness in the cabin deepened. The fire had died down to embers, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. I huddled closer to the hearth, clutching my knife, my senses on high alert. I tried to use my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. No bars, no connection to the outside world. I tried the cabin's landline, but it was dead. I was completely cut off, isolated in this desolate wilderness with whatever that thing was. A wave of despair washed over me. I was trapped, alone, with no way to contact help. I felt a surge of anger, of frustration. Why me? Why did this have to happen to me? I paced the small cabin, my mind racing. I had to do something, had to find a way out of this. But what? I was injured, exhausted, and outmatched. The creature was out there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting for me to make a mistake. Then, I heard it. A low growl, just outside the cabin. It was close, too close. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The growl grew louder, closer. It was circling the cabin, testing the defenses, looking for a way in. I grabbed a heavy piece of firewood and braced myself against the door. I knew it wouldn't hold for long. The creature was strong, far stronger than any human. But I had to try. I had to fight. The growls turned to snarls, then to a series of heavy thumps against the walls. The cabin shook, the windows rattled. I could feel the creature's rage, its hunger. It was toying with me, savoring the hunt. Then, with a deafening crash, the front door burst open. The flimsy wooden door splintered, and a rush of cold air swept through the cabin. I raised the firewood like a club, my heart pounding in my ears. The creature stepped through the doorway, its eyes burning like embers in the darkness. It was different now. Larger, more monstrous. Its form flickered and shifted, a grotesque amalgamation of animalistic features. Its limbs were elongated and twisted, its claws like daggers. Its face was a mask of snarling teeth and glowing eyes. I swung the firewood with all my might, catching the creature on the side of its head. It roared in pain, staggering back. I pressed my attack, adrenaline fueling my rage. I swung again and again, the wood connecting with sickening thuds. But the creature was relentless. It swatted the firewood aside, sending it clattering across the room. It lunged at me, its claws raking my chest. I cried out, falling back against the wall. The creature pinned me down, its weight crushing my ribs. Its hot, fetid breath filled my nostrils, its eyes burning into mine. I struggled, but it was no use. I was trapped, helpless. It opened its jaws, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. I closed my eyes, bracing for the end. But the bite never came. Instead, I heard a series of ear-splitting screeches. The creature reared back, its eyes wide with pain. I looked up to see a flurry of feathers and flapping wings. A large owl, its talons bared, was attacking the creature, its beak tearing at its flesh. The creature roared in fury, trying to shake off the owl. But the owl was relentless, its attacks precise and deadly. The creature stumbled back, its form flickering and distorting. It howled in pain, its cries echoing through the night. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the owl took flight, disappearing into the darkness. The creature stood there for a moment, its body trembling, its eyes filled with confusion. Then, with a final groan, it collapsed to the floor, its form dissolving into a swirling mist. I lay there, gasping for breath, my body shaking. I was alive. I had survived. But how? Why had the owl saved me? I looked around the cabin, my eyes falling on the old journal. I picked it up, flipping through the pages. There, amongst the faded writing, was a sketch of an owl, its eyes glowing in the darkness. Beneath it, a single word was scrawled, "Protector." I closed the journal, a shiver running down my spine. I wasn't alone in this fight. There were others, forces beyond my understanding, watching over me. But for how long? The cabin was no longer safe. The creature, or whatever the hell it was, knew where I was. It would be back. I had to get out of there, had to put as much distance between myself and that cursed place as possible. Ignoring the throbbing pain in my shoulder and the protests from my battered body, I scrambled out of the cabin. The woods were pitch black, the moon hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds. I stumbled through the undergrowth, my senses hyper-alert, every snapping twig sending a jolt of fear through me. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Away from the cabin, away from the creature, away from the terror that clung to me like a shroud. I ran until I could barely breathe, until my legs burned and my lungs ached. But I couldn't outrun it. I heard it behind me, a low growl that echoed through the trees. It was gaining on me, its footsteps heavy and relentless. I glanced back over my shoulder, and my blood ran cold. It was there, in the shadows, its eyes glowing like malevolent stars. It was closer now, its form more defined, a terrifying silhouette against the dark backdrop of the forest. I pushed myself harder, my feet pounding against the forest floor. I dodged trees, scrambled over rocks, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But it was no use. The creature was faster, stronger. It was closing in. I stumbled, falling to my knees. I looked up, despair washing over me. The creature stood over me, its form towering, its eyes burning into mine. It reached for me, its claws outstretched, ready to end it all. But I wasn't ready to die. With a surge of desperation, I scrambled to my feet and ran. I ran blindly, not caring where I was going, just away from the creature, away from the inevitable. I burst out of the trees, the ground sloping sharply downwards. I skidded to a halt, my heart pounding in my chest. I was on the edge of a cliff, a sheer drop into the darkness below. There was nowhere left to run. The creature snarled, its hot breath on my face. I could smell the stench of death, of decay, of something ancient and evil. Its eyes, burning like hot coals, bored into mine, filled with a predatory hunger that chilled me to the bone. I looked down at the chasm that yawned beneath me. The darkness was absolute, the depths unfathomable. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I staggered back from the edge. The creature advanced, its claws outstretched, its form shifting and distorting in the moonlight. It was a grotesque mockery of nature, a nightmare given flesh. I had a choice. I could stand there and fight, knowing I had no chance against this monstrous predator. Or I could take a leap of faith, a desperate gamble for survival. I chose the latter. With a surge of adrenaline, I turned and ran towards the edge of the cliff. The creature roared, its voice a guttural symphony of rage and frustration. But it was too late. I leaped into the void, the ground disappearing beneath my feet. The wind whipped past me, tearing at my clothes, my hair. I fell, and fell, and fell, the darkness swallowing me whole. I hit the water with a bone-jarring impact. The icy coldness shocked my system, sending my heart into overdrive. I struggled to the surface, gasping for air, my lungs burning. I looked up at the cliff, silhouetted against the night sky. The creature was there, on the edge, its form a dark shadow against the moonlit sky. It watched me, its eyes burning with an unholy light. Then, it turned and disappeared into the darkness. I treaded water, my body trembling with cold and fear. I had survived. I had escaped. But at what cost? I was lost, alone, injured, and stranded in the wilderness. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the creature was still out there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting for me to make another mistake. But for now, I was alive. And that was all that mattered. Okay, so this is how it all started. It was supposed to be just a fun weekend trip, you know? Me and my buddies, Mark, Jeff, and Chris, decided to explore this cave hidden deep in the Appalachian Mountains. We heard rumors about it for years, the Whispering Caves, locals called it, and we were finally going to check it out. The drive up was awesome. The mountains were stunning, all green and misty, and the air was so fresh. We were hyped, blasting music and cracking jokes the whole way. We parked the car at the trailhead and geared up, headlamps, backpacks with snacks and water, the whole 9 yards. The trail was pretty rugged, but we were all in decent shape, so it wasn't too bad. As we got closer, the air grew noticeably cooler, and there was this damp, earthy smell that hit you. Then we saw it, the cave mouth. It was massive, this gaping maw in the side of the mountain, almost like something was inviting us in. We checked our gear one last time, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The sunlight vanished instantly, and it was like stepping into another world. Our headlamps cut through the darkness, illuminating the rough walls and the damp, slippery floor. The silence was eerie, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water and our own breathing. We moved deeper, following a narrow passage that twisted and turned. The air got thicker, heavier, and it felt like the cave was pressing in on us. I remember feeling a shiver run down my spine, and it wasn't just from the cold. There was something else, something unsettling about the place. It felt like we were being watched. We pressed on, eager to see what lay ahead. But as we ventured further into the darkness, a sense of foreboding crept over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that we weren't alone in that cave. The deeper we went, the more incredible the cave became. It was like another world down there. We saw these massive stalactites hanging from the ceiling, some of them sparkling like diamonds in our headlamps. There were these weird rock formations too, like frozen waterfalls and giant mushrooms. It was seriously breathtaking. We came to this huge cavern, and it was like something out of an Indiana Jones movie. The ceiling was so high we couldn't even see it, and there were these strange markings on the walls. They looked ancient, like some kind of symbols or something. We were all buzzing, trying to figure out what they meant. But as we were checking out the markings, I noticed the air had changed. It felt colder, damper, and there was this weird stillness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I looked around, but I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. "Hey, did you guys hear that?" Chris whispered. We all froze, listening intently. There was a faint sound, like something dragging across the rock floor. It was coming from deeper in the cave. "Probably just some rocks settling," Mark said, but his voice sounded a little shaky. We decided to check it out anyway. Curiosity got the better of us, I guess. We followed the sound, our headlamps cutting through the darkness. The passage narrowed, and the air grew heavy with this presence. It felt like we were being watched, followed. Suddenly, Jeff, who was in front, stumbled back with a gasp. "Oh my God," he stammered, pointing to the wall. We shone our lights where he was pointing, and our blood ran cold. There, on the cave wall, was a handprint. But it wasn't like any handprint I'd ever seen. It was huge, with long, bony fingers, and it looked fresh. We were frozen, staring at that handprint like it was going to come to life. It was huge, way bigger than any human hand, and the way the fingers were splayed out, it was creepy as hell. "What the hell is that?" Jeff whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Mark said, his face pale. "But we need to get out of here." We turned to go back, but as we did, there was a deafening roar. The ground shook beneath our feet, and dust rained down from the ceiling. We stumbled and fell, our headlamps scattering across the floor. "What was that?" Chris yelled, scrambling to his feet. We shone our lights around, and our hearts sank. The passage we'd just come through was gone. A massive pile of rocks and debris blocked the way, sealing us in. "We're trapped," I shouted, panic rising in my throat. We rushed to the rock slide, frantically trying to move the boulders, but it was no use. They were too big, too heavy. We were completely cut off. "We need to calm down," Mark said, trying to take charge. "We need to think clearly." But it was hard to stay calm. We were trapped in the pitch-black heart of a mountain with no way out. And that handprint, it was a constant reminder that we weren't alone. We took stock of our supplies. We had some water and snacks, but not enough to last long. Our headlamps were starting to dim, and the batteries were running low. The air was getting thick and stale, and the silence was deafening. We tried to find another way out, exploring every nook and cranny of the cavern, but there was nothing. We were trapped, and the realization was sinking in like a stone. As the hours passed, the tension grew. We were tired, hungry, and scared. The fear was a living thing now, gnawing at our insides. We huddled together for warmth, our headlamps casting long, dancing shadows on the cave walls. And then, from the depths of the cave, we heard it again. That dragging sound. It was closer now, slower, more deliberate. It was like something was circling us, closing in. The dragging sound echoed through the cavern, sending chills down our spines. We huddled together, our headlamps casting flickering shadows that danced on the cave walls. The air was thick with fear, and we could hear each other's ragged breathing. "What is that?" Jeff whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know," I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. "But it's close." We strained our ears, listening for any movement, any sign of what was out there. The dragging sound stopped, and an eerie silence descended upon us. We held our breath, our eyes darting around in the darkness. Then, a blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. It was Chris. Chris. I yelled, shining my headlamp in the direction of the scream. But there was nothing. Only darkness. "Chris, where are you?" Mark shouted, his voice filled with panic. We called out for Chris, our voices echoing through the cavern, but there was no response. The silence was deafening. We spread out, searching for any sign of our friend. The fear was palpable, a heavy weight pressing down on us. We stumbled over rocks, our headlamps illuminating the jagged walls and the uneven floor. Then I saw it. A trail of blood. It led deeper into the cave, disappearing into the darkness. My stomach churned, and a wave of nausea washed over me. We followed the trail, our hearts pounding in our chests. The blood was fresh, and it painted a gruesome picture in our minds. We found Chris at the end of the trail. He was lying on the ground, his body contorted at an unnatural angle. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. His throat had been slashed, and blood pooled beneath him. We stood there, frozen in horror, unable to comprehend what we were seeing. Chris, our friend, was dead. The realization hit us like a ton of bricks. We weren't alone in this cave. Something else was here, something deadly. And it was hunting us. The sight of Chris's lifeless body sent shockwaves through us. We were paralyzed with fear, our minds struggling to process the gruesome reality. The cave, once a place of awe and wonder, had become a tomb. "We have to get out of here," Mark said, his voice shaking. "Now!" We knew he was right, but the rock slide blocked our only escape route. We were trapped, with a predator lurking in the shadows. We decided to move further into the cave, hoping to find another way out. We stuck together, our backs pressed against each other, our headlamps scanning the darkness. Every creak and groan of the cave sent shivers down our spines. We came to a narrow passage, barely wide enough for us to squeeze through. We hesitated, unsure if it was the right way, but we had no other choice. As we inched our way through the passage, the dragging sound returned. It was closer now, right behind us. We could feel its presence, a cold, malevolent force that sent chills down our spines. Suddenly, Jeff cried out. He stumbled and fell, his headlamp rolling away. "Jeff!" I shouted, shining my light towards him. He was lying on the ground, clutching his leg. Blood oozed between his fingers. "Something bit me," he screamed, his voice filled with pain and terror. We rushed to his side, our hearts pounding. We could see the puncture wounds on his leg, deep and ragged. "We have to get him out of here," Mark said, his voice urgent. But as we tried to lift Jeff, the dragging sound grew louder. It was right behind us, closing in. We turned to face the darkness, our headlamps cutting through the gloom. And then we saw it. A pair of eyes, glowing red in the darkness. They were huge, predatory eyes, filled with malice and hunger. A low growl rumbled through the cave, sending shivers down our spines. The creature stepped forward, its form emerging from the shadows. It was a mountain lion, its sleek body rippling with muscle. Its teeth were bared in a snarl, and its eyes burned with a primal hunger. We were frozen in terror, our minds unable to comprehend the danger we were in. The mountain lion lunged, its claws outstretched. Mark pushed Jeff out of the way, sacrificing himself to save his friend. The mountain lion pounced on Mark, its jaws clamping down on his throat. We watched in horror as the mountain lion tore into Mark, its growls echoing through the cave. Blood splattered the walls, and the air filled with the coppery scent of death. We knew we had to escape, but we were paralyzed with fear. The mountain lion had claimed its first victim, and we were next. The echoes of the mountain lion's growls and Mark's screams faded into an eerie silence. I was alone. Jeff, injured and terrified, had managed to crawl away during the chaos. I didn't know where he was, or if he was even alive. My body was trembling, my mind reeling from the shock. I stumbled back, my hand brushing against the cold, damp cave wall. The image of Mark being mauled by the mountain lion was burned into my brain. The blood, the screams, the sheer brutality of it all, it was too much. I sank to the ground, my back against the rough rock. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and I retched, but nothing came up. I was empty, hollowed out by fear and grief. My headlamp flickered, the batteries draining fast. The darkness seemed to press in on me, suffocating me. I felt like I was losing my mind. Hallucinations started to creep in. I saw shadows moving in the periphery, heard whispers in the silence. I thought I saw Mark's face, pale and bloodied, staring at me from the darkness. "Mark?" I croaked, my voice hoarse. But there was no answer. Only the echo of my own voice, mocking me in the silence. I curled up into a ball, my arms wrapped around my knees. I tried to shut out the horrors, to block out the memories. But they kept coming, flashing before my eyes like a macabre slideshow. I thought about our last moments together, laughing and joking as we descended into the cave. We were so carefree, so oblivious to the danger that lurked within. Now, 2 of my friends were dead, and I was trapped in this subterranean nightmare. I was alone, injured, and terrified. And the worst part was, I knew the mountain lion was still out there, waiting for me. The darkness deepened, and the silence grew heavier. I felt like I was sinking into a bottomless pit, a descent into madness. I was losing my grip on reality, and the line between what was real and what was imagined blurred. Then, I heard it again. The dragging sound. It was slow, deliberate, like something was savoring the hunt. It was coming for me. The dragging sound was getting closer. I knew I couldn't just sit there and wait to be its next victim. I had to fight back. My headlamp was dying, casting a weak, flickering light. I fumbled in my backpack for my spare, my hand shaking so badly I could barely grip it. Finally, I managed to switch it on, and the cave was flooded with a fresh beam of light. I scanned the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. The dragging sound stopped. It was close, very close. Then I saw it. The mountain lion was crouched just a few feet away, its eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. It was a magnificent creature, powerful and deadly. But I couldn't admire its beauty. It had killed my friends, and it was coming for me. The mountain lion tensed, ready to pounce. I knew I had only one chance. I lunged forward, screaming at the top of my lungs. The mountain lion hesitated, startled by my sudden movement. I grabbed a rock from the ground and hurled it at the creature. It struck the mountain lion on the head, and the beast roared in pain. The mountain lion lunged at me, its claws outstretched. I dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding its attack. I scrambled to my feet, my back against the cave wall. The mountain lion circled me, its eyes fixed on me, its muscles coiled like springs. I knew I couldn't outrun it. I had to stand my ground and fight. I picked up another rock, a larger one this time. The mountain lion lunged again, and I threw the rock with all my might. The rock struck the mountain lion squarely in the face. The creature roared in pain and staggered back. I saw my chance. I charged at the mountain lion, screaming like a madman. The mountain lion, disoriented and injured, backed away. I pressed my attack, throwing punches and kicks, anything to keep the creature at bay. The mountain lion swiped at me with its claws, but I managed to dodge its attacks. I felt a sharp pain in my arm as its claws raked my flesh, but I didn't stop. I kept fighting, fueled by adrenaline and fear. I knew that if I faltered, I would be dead. Finally, the mountain lion turned and fled, disappearing into the darkness. I collapsed to the ground, my body shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I had survived. I stumbled out of the cave mouth, blinking in the sudden sunlight. It was like being reborn. The fresh air hit me like a wave, and I took a deep, shuddering breath. I was alive. But the ordeal wasn't over. My body ached, my clothes were ripped and bloody, and my mind was still reeling from the horrors I had witnessed. I looked back at the cave, that dark maw on the mountainside, and shuddered. It felt like a lifetime ago that we had entered, full of excitement and anticipation. Now, it was a place of death and fear. I didn't know what had happened to Jeff. I hoped he had managed to escape, but I had no way of knowing. The thought of him still trapped in there, injured and alone, sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I stumbled down the trail, my legs shaky and weak. I must have looked like a ghost, emerging from the woods like that. A group of hikers saw me and rushed over, their faces etched with concern. They helped me to the trailhead, where someone called for help. The rescue team arrived, and I was taken to the hospital. I was treated for my injuries, which thankfully weren't life-threatening. But the mental scars were deeper. I was haunted by nightmares, flashbacks of the mountain lion's attack, and the faces of my dead friends. The authorities questioned me about what had happened in the cave. I told them everything, but they were skeptical. They said there had been no reports of mountain lion attacks in the area for years. They suggested I was suffering from shock and trauma, that my memories were unreliable. I knew they didn't believe me, but I didn't care. I knew what I had seen. I knew what had happened. I was released from the hospital a few days later, but I was a changed person. The world seemed different, darker, more dangerous. I was constantly on edge, jumpy at the slightest sound. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. I was diagnosed with PTSD. I started therapy, but it was a long and difficult process. The memories haunted me, and the guilt was overwhelming. Why had I survived when my friends hadn't? I tried to move on, to rebuild my life. But the shadows of the cave followed me everywhere. The sun was sinking fast, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple as I trudged deeper into the Appalachian wilderness. Sweat stung my eyes, and my legs burned with exhaustion. I should have turned back hours ago, but the stubborn part of me insisted on pushing forward, determined to reach the summit before nightfall. Now, with the light fading and the forest growing darker, I realized my mistake. The trail I'd been following had dwindled to a barely discernible path, overgrown with thorny bushes and fallen leaves. Panic gnawed at the edges of my confidence. I was lost. The air was thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a shiver down my spine. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something lurking in the shadows. Just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared below the horizon, I stumbled upon a clearing. Relief washed over me. Maybe there was a ranger station nearby, or a campsite where I could seek shelter for the night. But as I stepped into the clearing, my blood ran cold. There, in the middle of the clearing, lay a backpack. Not just any backpack, though. It was my backpack. The one I'd lost yesterday, along with my map and most of my supplies. How? I scanned the clearing, my heart pounding in my ears. There was no sign of anyone, but the backpack was here, lying open as if someone had just dumped it out. Then I saw it. A trail of blood leading into the dense woods beyond the clearing. The blood trail was faint, almost invisible in the fading light. It wound its way through the trees, beckoning me deeper into the heart of the wilderness. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run as fast as I could in the opposite direction. But a morbid curiosity, a desperate need for answers, propelled me forward. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees looming like silent giants, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and a faint metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. As I followed the trail, the sounds of the forest grew muted, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed in on my ears. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like a small animal caught in the open. Then, through the dense undergrowth, I saw a flicker of light. As I drew closer, the light resolved into a campfire, its flames dancing in the darkness. Huddled around the fire were 3 figures, their faces obscured by shadows. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Who were these people? What were they doing out here in the middle of nowhere? One of the figures looked up, and our eyes met. It was a woman, her face gaunt and weathered, her eyes burning with an unsettling intensity. She stared at me with a mixture of suspicion and something else. Something that made my skin crawl. I took a step back, my hand instinctively reaching for the small pocket knife I carried. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The woman didn't answer. She just continued to stare, her eyes boring into me. Another figure, a man with a thick beard and a menacing scowl, rose to his feet. He took a step towards me, and I could see the glint of something in his hand. A knife. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, crashing through the undergrowth, the sound of their pursuit hot on my heels. I didn't stop running until the campfire was just a distant flicker in the darkness. But even then, the sound of their pursuit echoed through the trees, urging me onward. My lungs burned, my legs ached, and thorns tore at my clothes as I scrambled through the undergrowth. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows and twisted branches, the darkness seeming to reach out and grab at me. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, sent a jolt of fear through me. I was losing ground. I could hear them gaining on me, their heavy breathing and the pounding of their footsteps growing louder with every passing moment. Panic clawed at my throat, threatening to choke me. Desperate, I scanned my surroundings for a place to hide. Spotting a narrow crevice between 2 massive boulders, I squeezed through, pulling myself into the darkness. The space was tight, barely wide enough for me to fit, but it offered some semblance of concealment. I crouched there, my heart pounding like a drum, listening for any sign of my pursuers. The sounds of the forest seemed amplified in the confined space, the rustling leaves, the snapping twigs, the distant hoot of an owl. Minutes crawled by, each one an eternity. Just when I thought they might have lost my trail, I heard a voice. "She's gotta be around here somewhere," the gruff voice of the bearded man growled. "Spread out," the woman's voice commanded. "She can't have gone far." Footsteps crunched on the leaves outside my hiding place. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find me. A shadow fell across the entrance to the crevice. I squeezed my eyes shut, my body trembling. "Hey," a voice whispered, close to my ear. "I see you." A rough hand reached in, grabbing my arm. I cried out, trying to pull away, but the grip was too strong. They dragged me out of the crevice, into the harsh light of their flashlights. The woman, the bearded man, and the third figure, his face still hidden in the shadows, loomed over me. I was trapped. They dragged me through the trees, the woman and the two men, their faces grim in the moonlight. My arms ached from the ropes binding my wrists, and my ankle throbbed with each step. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the haze of exhaustion. We emerged from the woods into a clearing. A dilapidated cabin stood in the center, its windows boarded up, its roof sagging under the weight of years and neglect. A single dim light flickered from within, casting long, eerie shadows across the clearing. The woman shoved me towards the cabin, and one of the men kicked open the door. The interior was dark and stifling, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and mildew. As my eyes adjusted, I saw a rough-hewn table and chairs, a fireplace filled with cold ashes, and a scattering of rusted tools. The woman lit a lantern, and the room flickered into a dim, unsettling life. It was then that I noticed the details. A hunting knife lay on the table, its blade stained a dark, ominous color. Beside it was a coil of rope, and next to that, a pile of something. I couldn't quite make it out in the dim light, but it looked like scraps of clothing, stained and torn. The woman gestured towards the table. "Sit," she commanded, her voice raspy and cold. I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to run. But the two men flanked me, their eyes hard and unforgiving. I had no choice but to obey. As I sat, my gaze fell on the pile of scraps on the table. I leaned closer, my stomach churning with a growing sense of dread. It wasn't clothing. It was flesh. Human flesh. The woman chuckled, a dry, brittle sound that echoed through the small cabin. "You see, city girl," she said, her voice dripping with malice, "we're not like those folks you're used to. Out here, we live by a different set of rules." My stomach churned. I didn't need her to elaborate. The evidence was scattered across the table, the knife, the rope, the undeniable proof of their gruesome feast. The bearded man stepped closer, his eyes glinting in the lantern light. "We've been watching you for days," he said, his voice a low growl. "You shouldn't have strayed from the trail." "Why?" I croaked, my throat tight with fear. "Why are you doing this?" The woman smiled, a chillingly predatory expression. "Survival," she said simply. "Out here, you take what you can get." The other man, the one who had remained silent until now, spoke up. His voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle. "Don't worry," he said, "it'll be quick." I recoiled, my mind reeling. They were going to kill me. They were going to eat me. The woman picked up the knife, testing its edge with her thumb. "Any last words?" she asked, her smile widening. I shook my head, unable to speak. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them back, refusing to give them the satisfaction. The bearded man grabbed my arm, pulling me to my feet. I struggled, but it was futile. They were too strong. They dragged me towards a door at the back of the cabin. As they opened it, a wave of cold, damp air washed over me. I caught a glimpse of a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the earth. The woman pushed me forward. "Down you go," she said. "Your new home awaits." I stumbled down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The darkness swallowed me whole. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness. The air grew colder, damper, heavy with the stench of decay and something else, something faintly metallic that made my stomach churn. I fumbled along the rough-hewn walls, my bound hands scraping against the damp stone. The stairs seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning into the depths of the earth. Fear gnawed at me, whispering doubts and horrors in my ear. What awaited me at the bottom? What fresh hell had these people prepared for me? Finally, the stairs ended, opening into a small, dank chamber. A single flickering lantern cast long, dancing shadows across the walls, revealing a scene that made my blood run cold. The room was littered with bones. Human bones. Skulls grinned from dusty corners, rib cages lay scattered across the floor, and femurs protruded from piles of dirt. The metallic scent was overpowering now, thick and cloying. In the center of the room, a crude fire pit smoldered, its embers glowing like malevolent eyes. Above it, suspended from a rusty hook, hung a carcass. Even in the dim light, I could recognize the shape, the torso, the limbs, the severed head. It was a human body. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. Nausea surged through me, threatening to overwhelm me. This was no ordinary cabin. This was a charnel house. A place of death and unspeakable horrors. A sound behind me made me whirl around. The woman stood at the top of the stairs, her face illuminated by the flickering lantern light. She smiled, a cruel, triumphant smile. "Welcome," she said, her voice echoing through the chamber, "to your final resting place." The woman's laughter echoed down the stairs, a chilling counterpoint to the groans and creaks of the old house. I stood frozen, my eyes darting from the grinning skulls to the swaying carcass, my stomach churning with a potent mix of fear and revulsion. Suddenly, a sob escaped my lips. It was a small, pathetic sound, but it seemed to break the spell. The woman's laughter died away, and a flicker of something like curiosity crossed her face. "Scared, city girl?" she asked, her voice a mocking purr. I couldn't answer. I just stood there, trembling, my gaze fixed on the gruesome tableau before me. The woman descended the stairs, her boots crunching on the earthen floor. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes glittering in the lantern light. "You know," she said, her voice low and conversational, "you're not the first one we've brought down here." I shuddered. The implication was clear. This wasn't just a place of death. It was a place of consumption. "But you're different," she continued, tilting her head. "There's something about you, something special." I met her gaze, a spark of defiance igniting within me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice hoarse. The woman smiled, a slow, predatory smile that sent shivers down my spine. "You're strong," she said. "Resourceful. And most importantly," she paused, her eyes gleaming, "you're still alive." She reached out, her fingers tracing a line down my cheek. I flinched, but she didn't seem to notice. "We could use someone like you," she murmured. "Someone to help us survive." A glimmer of hope flickered in the darkness. Was she offering me a way out? A chance to live? "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The woman's smile widened. "Just cooperate," she said. "And you might just live to see another day." My mind raced. Cooperate? Was that even possible? Could I stomach the horrors of this place, the stench of death, the knowledge of what they did, what they ate? But the alternative was unthinkable. To die in this dark, gruesome hole, another nameless victim in their twisted game. What kind of cooperation? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The woman's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed a little too sharp, a little too long. "We need someone on the outside," she said. "Someone to procure things for us. Things we can't get ourselves." My blood ran cold. They wanted me to be their accomplice, their provider. What kind of things? I asked, dreading the answer. "Supplies," she said. "Food. And..." She paused, her eyes gleaming, "sometimes fresh meat." I recoiled, bile rising in my throat. They wanted me to lure victims to them, to become a part of their monstrous cycle. I can't," I stammered, my voice shaking. The woman's smile vanished. Her eyes hardened, and a shadow passed over her face. "You don't have a choice," she said coldly. "Cooperate or die." I closed my eyes, battling the nausea that threatened to overwhelm me. This was a nightmare. A twisted, impossible choice. But in this dark, subterranean hell, the impossible had become my reality. "All right," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'll cooperate." The woman's smile returned, triumphant and cruel. "Good," she said. "You've made the right decision. Now, come with me. We have much to discuss." The woman led me back up the stairs, the lantern light swaying, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the walls. My stomach churned with every step. The image of the charnel owls burned into my mind. But I kept moving, driven by a desperate will to survive. Back in the cabin, the bearded man and the other man, I still didn't know his name, were waiting. They eyed me with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The woman, however, seemed pleased with her acquisition. "We have plans for you," she said, her voice laced with a chilling excitement. "Big plans." She outlined their scheme. I was to return to civilization, to the world I knew, and act as their scout. I would identify potential victims, loners, stragglers, anyone who wouldn't be missed, and lure them back to the mountains. The thought made me sick. but I nodded, feigning agreement. I had to play along to gain their trust. Only then would I have a chance to escape, to alert the authorities, to bring these monsters to justice. They spent the next few days training me. They taught me how to track, how to hunt, how to prepare the meat. I forced myself to participate, to stifle the screams that clawed at my throat, to swallow the bile that rose in my throat. It was a gruesome, soul-crushing ordeal, but I endured. Finally, the day came for my first mission. They equipped me with a backpack, a map, and a hunting knife. The woman gave me a chilling smile. "Don't disappoint us," she said. I stepped out into the sunlight, blinking against the sudden brightness. The forest seemed different now, tainted by the darkness I had witnessed. But I walked on, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. I had to find someone to save. Someone to help me bring these monsters down. I hiked for days, following the well-worn trails, my senses alert to every sound, every movement in the shadows. The forest seemed to watch me, its silence heavy with unspoken threats. I knew they were out there, somewhere, those eyes that had seen too much, the hands stained with blood. I hadn't found anyone. No lone hikers, no stragglers, no one who fit the profile the woman had described. Disappointment gnawed at me, but so did a strange sense of relief. Was I capable of luring someone to their deaths? Was I already becoming one of them? As dusk fell, I stumbled upon a small campsite. A tent stood nestled amongst the trees, a campfire smoldering nearby. A lone figure sat by the fire, their back to me. My heart pounded. This was it. This was my chance. I approached cautiously, my footsteps muffled by the soft earth. The figure didn't turn. They were humming a tuneless melody, their voice low and melancholic. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. The figure turned, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a young woman, her face illuminated by the firelight. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with surprise. "Oh, hello," she said, her voice friendly. "I didn't hear you approach." I forced a smile. "I didn't mean to startle you," I said. "I'm just passing through." "Are you hiking alone?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes," I said. "Just me." She smiled. "Me too," she said. "It's nice to see another friendly face out here." We chatted for a while, exchanging stories about our travels, our lives. She was a kind, gentle soul, full of life and laughter. My heart ached. As darkness fell, she invited me to share her campsite. I hesitated, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. This was it. This was the moment. "Sure," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'd like that." Okay, so this is gonna sound crazy, but hear me out. It was a few summers ago, back when I was still living with my folks. My dad's a park ranger, right? Spends most of his time out in the Appalachian Mountains, keeping an eye on things, making sure dumb tourists don't fall off cliffs or start forest fires. He's always been a pretty quiet guy, keeps to himself, but I guess that comes with the job. Being alone in the wilderness all day can do that to a person. Anyway, one night he asks if I want to tag along on his shift. Says it'll be a good experience, maybe even a little exciting. Now, I'm not exactly the outdoorsy type, more of a video games and pizza kind of guy, but something about the idea of being out in the mountains at night, with just my dad and the sounds of the woods, kinda appealed to me. Plus, I figured it might be a chance to bond with the old man, you know? So, I agreed. Big mistake. Huge. We drove up to this remote ranger station, way up in the mountains. I swear, the road was so bumpy and winding I thought we were gonna lose a tire. By the time we got there, it was already getting dark. The station was this small, creepy cabin, surrounded by nothing but trees. I mean, seriously, trees for miles. The only light came from a flickering bulb above the porch and the moon hanging low in the sky. As we unloaded the truck, I could hear all these weird noises coming from the woods. Rustling leaves, snapping twigs, owls hooting. It was enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My dad just chuckled and said, "Getting spooked already, huh?" I tried to play it cool, but yeah, I was definitely a little freaked out. Inside, the station was even creepier. Dusty furniture, cobwebs in the corners, a musty smell that made me want to sneeze. There was a crackling radio on the desk, and a map of the park on the wall with pins marking different trails and landmarks. My dad showed me around, explaining how everything worked, but I wasn't really paying attention. I was too busy looking out the windows, watching the shadows move in the darkness. He told me about some of the local legends and rumors. Stuff about strange lights in the sky, weird animal noises, even stories about people disappearing in the woods. I tried to laugh it off, but there was this uneasy feeling in my gut, like something wasn't right. Little did I know, things were about to get a whole lot worse. We were settling in for the night, my dad fiddling with the radio while I tried to find a comfy spot on the creaky old couch. The wind was howling outside, rattling the windows and making the whole cabin groan. I was just about to doze off when the radio suddenly crackled to life. "Ranger Station 4, do you copy?" a voice called out, strained and distorted. My dad grabbed the receiver. "Station 4, copy that. What's your status?" The voice on the other end was barely audible through the static. "We have a situation, urgent, need assistance, South Trail, creature." "Say again, please," my dad said, leaning closer to the speaker. "You're breaking up." More static. Then, a panicked scream that made my blood run cold. The radio went silent. My dad's face was grim. "That didn't sound good," he muttered. "What do you think it was?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hard to say," he replied, scratching his chin. "Could be a lost hiker, maybe someone injured. But that scream, that was something else." He paced around the room, then grabbed his jacket and service weapon. "We need to check it out." "Wait, what?" I exclaimed. Are you serious? It's the middle of the night. Can't we just wait till morning? No way, he said, his voice firm. That call sounded urgent. Someone could be in serious trouble. He looked at me, his eyes filled with determination. You coming? I hesitated. The thought of going back out into those dark woods, especially after the creepy radio call, terrified me. But I also knew I couldn't let my dad go alone. Fine, I mumbled, trying to sound brave. But if we see anything freaky, I'm out of there. My dad smirked. Don't worry, son. We'll stick together. Famous last words, right? We grabbed our flashlights, a first aid kit, and headed back out into the night. The wind had picked up, and the trees were swaying like they were trying to warn us about something. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, half expecting to see some glowing eyes watching us from the shadows. As we followed the south trail, the feeling of dread grew stronger. The woods were silent now, eerily silent. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And I had a feeling that something was about to happen. The trail was narrow, barely visible in the dim moonlight filtering through the dense canopy of trees. We trudged along, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, the beams dancing over gnarled branches and thick undergrowth. The only sounds were our own footsteps crunching on the dry leaves and the occasional rustle of some unseen creature in the bushes. You ever seen anything weird out here? I asked, trying to break the silence. My dad shrugged. Nothing I couldn't explain. Coyotes, bears, the occasional drunk hunter. You hear a lot of stories, though. People get spooked in the dark, their imaginations run wild. I nodded, but I wasn't convinced. The radio call, the scream, it all felt too real to be just someone's overactive imagination. We walked for what felt like hours, the trail winding deeper and deeper into the heart of the mountains. The air grew colder, and a thick fog started to roll in, swirling around our feet like ghostly apparitions. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. Up ahead, my dad said, pointing his flashlight towards a faint glow in the distance. Looks like a campsite. As we got closer, I could see the outline of a tent, slumped and torn, like something had ripped through it. A campfire had been hastily abandoned, the embers still glowing faintly in the darkness. Gear was scattered around, a backpack, a sleeping bag, a cooking pot, all tossed aside in a hurry. My dad knelt down, examining the ground. There's blood, he said, his voice grave. And a lot of it. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a lost hiker. Something terrible had happened here. We circled the campsite, searching for any sign of a missing person. The fog was getting thicker, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. I felt a prickle of unease, like we were being watched. Then, we heard it. A noise from the depths of the woods, a low guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. It was followed by a high-pitched shriek, like an animal in pain. My dad froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. Stay close, he whispered, his eyes scanning the darkness. The flashlight beams danced over the trees, searching for the source of the sounds. And then, We saw it. A figure, tall and lanky, moving between the trees. It was too dark to make out any details, but the way it moved, the way it seemed to glide through the undergrowth, was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. "Hey!" my dad shouted, his voice echoing through the silent woods. "Who's there?" The figure stopped, its head turning towards us. Two glowing eyes, like embers in the darkness, stared back at us. My dad raised his weapon. "Identify yourself," he yelled. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, watching us, its eyes burning into us. And then it lunged. The creature lunged out of the darkness, and for the first time, I got a clear look at it. It was humanoid, tall and gaunt, with long limbs and a hunched back. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over its bones. But it was the face that truly horrified me. It was a grotesque mockery of a human face, with sunken eyes that glowed with an eerie yellow light, a twisted snout filled with sharp teeth, and a lipless mouth that stretched into a wide, unnatural grin. My dad fired a shot, the sound echoing through the trees. The creature flinched, but it didn't go down. It just stood there, staring at us, its grin widening. Then, with a speed that defied its lanky frame, it turned and vanished back into the darkness. What the hell was that? I gasped, my voice trembling. My dad's face was pale, his jaw clenched. "I don't know," he muttered, "but we need to get out of here." He grabbed my arm and pulled me along, running back down the trail. The fog was thicker than ever, making it hard to see where we were going. I stumbled and fell, scraping my hands on the rough ground. "Come on," my dad urged, hauling me back to my feet. "We can't slow down." We ran blindly through the woods, the sounds of our own panic breathing echoing in our ears. I could hear the creature behind us, crashing through the undergrowth, its growls getting closer. We reached a clearing, the moonlight illuminating the path ahead. But as we burst out of the trees, we came to a sudden halt. The path ended abruptly at the edge of a steep ravine, the ground crumbling away beneath our feet. "Shit," my dad cursed. "We're trapped." I looked back, my heart sinking. The creature was emerging from the trees, its eyes fixed on us, its grin filled with malice. We were cornered, with nowhere to go. My dad raised his weapon again, his finger on the trigger. "Get behind me," he said, his voice strained. I obeyed, cowering behind him, my body shaking with fear. The creature advanced slowly, savoring the moment, relishing our terror. Just when I thought it was going to pounce, my dad fired another shot. This time, the creature howled in pain, clutching its arm. It stumbled back, its eyes filled with rage. But it didn't retreat. It just stood there, watching us, its bloodlust undiminished. We were out of options. We were going to die. The creature let out a guttural roar, and I knew we were done for. But then, something unexpected happened. A large rock, dislodged from the cliff above, came crashing down, narrowly missing the creature. It stumbled back, momentarily distracted. "This is our chance," my dad yelled, grabbing my hand. "Run!" We scrambled back down the trail, our legs pumping, our lungs burning. I didn't look back, but I could hear the creature in pursuit, its heavy footsteps pounding the earth. The trail was treacherous, full of roots and rocks, and the fog made it even harder to see. I tripped and fell again, my ankle twisting beneath me. Pain shot through my leg, but I couldn't stop. I had to keep moving. My dad helped me up, his face etched with worry. "Can you walk?" I gritted my teeth. "I think so." We pressed on, the creature gaining on us. I could hear its ragged breathing, smell its foul stench. It was close. Too close. We came to a fork in the trail. "Which way?" I gasped, my voice hoarse. My dad hesitated, his eyes darting back and forth. "I don't know." "Just pick one." I chose the left path, and we plunged into the darkness. The trail was even narrower here, barely wide enough for us to run side by side. Branches whipped at our faces, thorns tore at our clothes. The creature was right behind us now, its growls echoing in our ears. I could feel its hot breath on my neck. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath me. I screamed as I tumbled down a steep embankment, landing with a thud in a pile of leaves. I lay there for a moment, stunned, my body aching. I tried to get up, but my ankle throbbed with pain. I was trapped. I looked up and saw my dad peering down at me, his face filled with horror. "Go!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Don't worry about me. Just go." He hesitated, his eyes filled with tears. But he knew I was right. He couldn't save me. He turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness. I was alone. I lay there in the darkness, the pain in my ankle throbbing in time with my racing heart. The fall had knocked the wind out of me, and I struggled to catch my breath. Panic clawed at my throat, threatening to choke me. I had to get out of there. I couldn't just lie there and wait for that thing to find me. But my ankle. I tried to move it, but a sharp pain shot through my leg. I was pretty sure it was broken. I fumbled for my flashlight, my fingers closing around the cold metal. Clicking it on, I scanned the area around me. I was at the bottom of a steep, wooded ravine, the dense foliage blocking out most of the moonlight. The ground was covered in leaves and rotting branches, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying vegetation. I tried to call out for my dad, but my voice was little more than a hoarse whisper. "Dad. Dad." Only the echo of my own voice answered me. I knew I couldn't rely on him to come back for me. He had to get out of there, to get help. It was up to me to save myself. Taking a deep breath, I tried to ignore the pain and started to crawl. Every movement sent jolts of agony through my leg, but I gritted my teeth and pushed on. I had to find my way back to the trail, back to the ranger station. I crawled for what felt like an eternity, my hands and knees raw and bleeding. The undergrowth was thick, thorns tearing at my clothes and skin. I felt insects crawling over me, spiders spinning webs across my face. I had no idea where I was going. The ravine twisted and turned, the dense foliage disorienting me. I was lost, alone, and injured. and I knew that thing was still out there, hunting me. As I crawled, I noticed something strange. There were symbols carved into the trunks of the trees, crude markings that looked like claws and teeth. I'd never seen anything like them before. The symbols filled me with a sense of dread. They were like a trail marker, a sign that I was heading deeper into the creature's territory. I had to get out of there. I had to find my way back to the trail, back to safety. But the ravine seemed to stretch on forever, the darkness closing in around me. I was starting to lose hope. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. The sound was closer now, a slow, deliberate crunching of leaves and snapping of twigs. It was coming for me. Panic surged through me, hot and suffocating. I had to hide. But where? My eyes darted around, frantically searching for cover. There was a hollow log a few feet away, half hidden in the undergrowth. It wasn't much, but it was the best I could find. I scrambled towards it, ignoring the pain in my ankle. I squeezed myself into the narrow space, pulling my legs in close. The log was damp and smelled of decay, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be hidden. I held my breath, listening for any sign of the creature. The crunching sound stopped. It was close. Very close. I could hear it moving around outside the log, sniffing the air, its heavy breathing rasping in the silence. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it wouldn't find me. Minutes passed, each one an eternity. The creature continued to circle the log, its claws scratching against the bark. I could feel the vibrations through the wood, each scratch sending shivers down my spine. Then I heard a low growl right outside the log. It had found me. I held my breath, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. The creature sniffed at the opening of the log, its hot breath washing over me. I could smell its foul stench, a mix of blood and decay. It paused, as if considering its options. Then, it started to claw at the log, trying to tear it open. I cringed back, pressing myself against the damp wood. The log creaked and groaned under the creature's assault. I knew it wouldn't hold for long. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there and wait to be ripped apart. But what could I do? I was trapped, injured, and unarmed. Then I remembered my flashlight. It was still clutched in my hand. Maybe, just maybe. I took a deep breath and switched the flashlight on, aiming the beam directly at the opening of the log. The creature recoiled with a startled hiss. The light seemed to hurt it, to confuse it. It backed away from the log, its eyes narrowed, its growls turning into whimpers. I held the flashlight steady, my hand trembling. I didn't know how long I could keep this up, but it was my only chance. The creature paced back and forth, its eyes fixed on the light. It seemed to be debating whether to attack or retreat. Then, with a final snarl, it turned and vanished back into the darkness. I collapsed back against the log, my body shaking with relief. I had survived. For now. But I knew I wasn't safe yet. I had to get out of that ravine, find my way back to the trail, and get help. and I had to do it before the creature came back. The silence in the ravine was deafening after the creature retreated. I stayed huddled in the log for a while, too scared to move, my flashlight beam still trained on the opening. But I knew I couldn't stay there forever. My ankle was throbbing, and the cold, damp air was chilling me to the bone. I had to find a way out. Carefully, I eased myself out of the log, wincing as my injured ankle touched the ground. I tested my weight on it, and pain shot up my leg. I could barely put any pressure on it. Crap, crap, crap. This was bad. Really bad. I had to find something to use as a crutch. Scanning the area with my flashlight, I spotted a sturdy branch lying on the ground. I crawled over and grabbed it, pulling myself up. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. Leaning heavily on the branch, I started to make my way through the ravine. The going was slow and painful, but I was determined to escape. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, expecting to see those glowing eyes watching me from the shadows. The ravine seemed to go on forever. I stumbled and fell several times, my ankle screaming in protest. But I refused to give up. I had to keep moving. Then I heard it again. The crunching of leaves, the snapping of twigs. The creature was back. Panic surged through me. I had to find somewhere to hide, and fast. I spotted a narrow crevice in the rocks, barely wide enough to squeeze through. I scrambled towards it, pushing myself through the tight opening. The rocks scraped against my skin, tearing my clothes, but I didn't care. I was hidden. I pressed myself against the cold, damp rock, holding my breath. The creature was close now, very close. I could hear its heavy breathing, smell its foul stench. It paused outside the crevice, sniffing the air. I could feel its hot breath on my face. Then it started to claw at the rocks, trying to reach me. The rocks crumbled and fell, dust raining down on me. I knew I couldn't stay there much longer. I had to do something drastic. I had to create a diversion. Looking around, I spotted a pile of loose rocks near the entrance of the crevice. With a grunt, I pushed myself away from the wall and hobbled towards the rocks. The creature heard the movement and turned its head. Its eyes locked onto mine, and I saw a flash of triumph in their depths. It had found me again. I took a deep breath and kicked at the rocks, sending them tumbling down the ravine. The creature, startled by the sudden noise, turned its attention to the falling rocks. It was now or never. I lunged out of the crevice, pushing past the creature. It snarled and swiped at me, its claws tearing through my jacket. But I managed to dodge its attack and scramble away. I ran as fast as I could, my ankle screaming in agony. I didn't look back, but I could hear the creature in pursuit, its enraged roars echoing through the ravine. I had to get out of there. I had to reach the trail. I had to find my dad. But the ravine seemed to stretch on forever, the darkness closing in around me. I was starting to lose hope. Just as I thought my lungs were about to burst and my legs give out from under me, I stumbled out of the ravine and back onto the trail. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. I was still in danger, still lost, and now even further from the ranger station. I limped along the trail, my makeshift crutch digging into my armpit, the pain in my ankle a constant reminder of my predicament. The woods were silent again, the only sound my own ragged breathing and the thump of my crutch on the hard-packed earth. Then, through the trees, I saw a flicker of light. Hope surged through me. Could it be my dad? I pushed myself forward, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. As I got closer, I saw him. He was sitting on a fallen log, his back against a tree, his flashlight aimed down the trail. He looked exhausted, his face pale and drawn, his clothes torn. But he was alive. Dad. I cried out, my voice hoarse. He looked up, his eyes widening in surprise. Son, you're alive. I thought. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I limped towards him, tears streaming down my face. I thought I'd lost you, I said, my voice choked with emotion. He pulled me into a hug, his grip tight. I thought I'd lost you too, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I went back for you, but you were gone. I didn't know what to do. I pulled back, looking at him with concern. You're hurt. He winced, touching his side. It's just a scratch. That thing, it's strong. But I managed to slow it down. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate urgency. Listen, we don't have much time. It'll be back. You need to go. Get back to the ranger station, call for help. But what about you? I asked, my voice filled with fear. I'll be fine, he said, forcing a smile. I'll hold it off. Just go. I hesitated, torn between leaving him and saving myself. But I knew he was right. I couldn't help him if I was dead. Okay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I turned to go, but he grabbed my arm. Son, he said, his voice grave. Be careful. And thank you. I nodded, tears blurring my vision. Then I turned and ran, limping as fast as I could down the trail. I didn't look back. I could hear the creature's roars in the distance, getting closer. My dad was buying me time, sacrificing himself to give me a chance to escape. I had to make it. I had to get help. I had to avenge him. I ran until I thought my heart would explode. The pain in my ankle was excruciating, but I pushed through it, fueled by adrenaline and fear. I couldn't let my dad's sacrifice be in vain. The trail seemed to stretch on forever, the darkness pressing in on me, the silence broken only by my own ragged gasps for air. I kept imagining the creature behind me, its glowing eyes fixed on my back, its claws reaching for me. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Finally, through the trees, I saw the faint outline of the ranger station. Hope surged through me, a beacon in the darkness. I was almost there. I stumbled towards the cabin, my legs shaking, my vision blurred. I fumbled for the doorknob, my fingers closing around the cold metal. I turned the knob, the door creaking open. I stumbled inside, slamming the door behind me. I leaned against it, gasping for breath, my body trembling. I was safe. For now. I fumbled for the radio, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. Finally, I managed to connect with the emergency dispatcher. "Help, please." I gasped into the receiver. "My dad, creature, South Trail." The dispatcher's voice, calm and reassuring, came through the speaker. "Stay calm, sir. What's your location?" I gave him the coordinates of the ranger station. "Please hurry," I begged. "He's all alone out there." The dispatcher assured me help was on the way. I sank to the floor, my body shaking with exhaustion and fear. I had made it. I was alive. But my dad. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. I could still hear his voice, his last words to me, "Be careful, and thank you." I didn't know if he was alive or dead. I didn't know if the creature was still out there, lurking in the darkness. But I knew one thing: I would never forget this night. I would never forget the horror I had witnessed, the fear I had felt, the sacrifice my dad had made. And I would never stop looking over my shoulder, waiting for the creature to return. Okay, so this all happened like a month ago, and I'm still having nightmares about it. Seriously messed up stuff. I gotta get it all down, just to try and make sense of it, you know? It started out normal enough. Me and my buddies, Mark and Chris, we were heading up to the Appalachians for a weekend of camping and fishing. We do this every fall, kind of a tradition. This year, though, we decided to try a new spot, this place called Black Creek Hollow. It was way off the beaten path, like seriously deep in the woods. We're talking miles down dirt roads, no cell service, the whole 9 yards. Mark, he's the one who found it. Found some obscure website about hidden gems in the Appalachians, and this place was all over it. Pictures of this amazing waterfall, crystal clear creek, the works. Chris and I were a little hesitant, you know, going somewhere so isolated. But Mark, he was all gung-ho about getting away from it all, embracing nature, all that crap. We got there late Friday afternoon, sun already starting to dip below the trees. The place was even creepier than I expected. Beautiful, yeah, but in a kind of unsettling way. Like the kind of beauty that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The woods were thick and dark, even in the daylight, and the silence was heavy. You could hear every little rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig. It felt like something was watching us. We set up camp in a small clearing near the creek. As we were unpacking the gear, Mark starts telling us about this local legend, the Wampus Cat. Some kind of mountain lion bear woman hybrid thing, supposed to be super aggressive and freaking terrifying. Chris and I were like, dude, come on, seriously? But Mark, he was eating it up. He even had printouts of these old newspaper articles about supposed Wampus Cat sightings. Just a little local folklore, guys, he said, grinning. Adds to the ambience, right? Ambience my ass. It totally freaked me out. I mean, I don't usually believe in that kind of stuff, but there was something about that place. It just felt off. That night, after we cooked up some burgers and had a few beers, I tried to get some sleep. But I kept having these crazy vivid nightmares. This thing, this cat-like thing with these glowing red eyes, it was stalking me through the woods. I could hear its growls, feel its hot breath on my neck. I woke up in a cold sweat, heart pounding. I told myself it was just the beer, the stress of being out in the middle of nowhere. But deep down, I couldn't shake this feeling that something was wrong. Really, really wrong. I woke up to the sound of Chris cursing. Apparently, he'd rolled off his sleeping bag and landed face first in the dirt. Typical Chris. Mark was already up, making coffee over the campfire. The smell of wood smoke and burnt coffee actually made me feel a little better, a little more human. "Dude, you look like crap," Chris said, squinting at me through the morning sunlight. "Rough night?" I just grunted and poured myself a cup of coffee. I didn't want to tell them about the nightmare. They'd just make fun of me. We spent the morning fishing in the creek. The water was icy cold, but clear as glass. We caught a few trout, nothing huge, but enough for dinner. It was actually peaceful. For a while, I almost forgot about the creepy feeling from the night before. Almost. But as the day wore on, things started to get weird again. We kept hearing these strange noises coming from the woods, like a cross between a growl and a scream. Mark tried to pass it off as a bobcat or something, but it didn't sound like any bobcat I'd ever heard. And then there were the shadows. It felt like they were always moving, always shifting, even when there was no wind. That night, the nightmares came back. Worse this time. The creature was closer, more detailed. I could see its fangs, its claws, the way its fur bristled with rage. It was hunting me, chasing me through the endless dark woods. I woke up screaming, tangled in my sleeping bag. Mark and Chris were staring at me, their faces pale in the moonlight. "Dude, what the hell?" Mark whispered. "You okay?" I tried to play it cool, said it was just a bad dream. But I could see the worry in their eyes. They knew something was up. And so did I. The next morning, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. None of us really talked about what happened the night before, but it was hanging in the air like a bad smell. We packed up our gear and decided to head to the waterfall that Mark had been raving about. Figured maybe a change of scenery would do us some good. The trail to the waterfall was narrow and overgrown. We had to push our way through thick bushes and climb over fallen logs. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, expecting to see those glowing red eyes staring at me from the shadows. When we finally reached the waterfall, it was underwhelming. I mean, it was pretty, sure, but not the cascading torrent that Mark had described. More like a trickle of water dribbling down some mossy rocks. "Seriously?" Chris muttered. "We hiked all this way for this?" Mark just shrugged and mumbled something about the website pictures being misleading. He seemed off, distracted, almost like he was listening for something. Then we noticed it. Chris's backpack was gone. He'd left it leaning against a tree at the base of the waterfall, and now it was just gone. What the? Chris stammered, his eyes white with disbelief. We searched the area, but there was no sign of the backpack. No sign of a struggle, no footprints, nothing. It was like it had vanished into thin air. Maybe it fell into the water? Mark suggested, but his voice sounded weak even to him. We checked the pool at the bottom of the waterfall, but there was no sign of the backpack. Just dark, murky water and a few slippery rocks. As we were searching, I noticed something else. Scratches on the bark of a nearby tree. Deep, claw-like scratches, way too high for any animal I could think of. And beneath the scratches, a patch of dark, matted fur. My blood ran cold. The nightmares, they weren't just nightmares. They were warnings. That night, back at the campsite, I couldn't sleep at all. Every little sound sent my heart racing. The wind whispering through the trees sounded like growls. The snapping of twigs sounded like footsteps. I lay there, wide awake, listening to the darkness, waiting for the inevitable. And then it came. Another nightmare. But this time, it was different. This time, I saw its face. The Wampus cat. It was a horrifying blend of feline and human, with a snarling mouth full of razor-sharp teeth and eyes that burned with an unholy light. It spoke to me in my dream, its voice had guttural growl that echoed in my skull. "You are mine," it said. "You will be mine." I woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat. The campfire had burned down to embers, casting eerie shadows across the campsite. I could feel its presence out there, in the darkness, watching me, waiting for me. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that we were now alone in those woods. Dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of sickly gray and orange. None of us had slept a wink. Chris was a wreck, pacing back and forth, muttering about his lost backpack and how we were going to get out of there. Mark was trying to stay calm, but his eyes were bloodshot and his hands were shaking. Me? I was just numb. The nightmare had shaken me to my core. I felt like I was walking through a fog, detached from everything. We decided to pack up camp and get the hell out of there. No more waterfall hunting, no more embracing nature. We just wanted to get back to civilization, back to somewhere safe. But as we were loading the car, we heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural, echoing through the trees. It was close. Too close. We froze, our blood turning to ice. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of something moving through the underbrush. Something big. Something heavy. "Get in the car." Mark yelled, his voice cracking with fear. We scrambled into the car, slamming the door shut. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. The engine sputtered and coughed, then finally roared to life. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, and we lurched forward, tires spinning in the loose gravel. As we sped down the dirt road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. And that's when I saw it. the wampus cat. It was standing at the edge of the clearing, watching us go. Its eyes, those glowing red eyes, burned with hatred and hunger. It was massive, bigger than any mountain lion I'd ever seen, its fur matted and tangled, its claws like daggers. And it was fast. Unnaturally fast. It leaped onto the road and started chasing us, its powerful legs propelling it forward with incredible speed. We were doing maybe 30 miles an hour, but it was gaining on us. I could hear its growls getting closer, its heavy breathing behind us. Faster. Chris screamed, his face pressed against the window. I floored it, pushing the old Jeep to its limits. The engine howled in protest, but we were gaining some distance. But not enough. The wampus cat was still right behind us, its eyes fixed on us with a terrifying intensity. We hit a bump in the road, and the Jeep swerved violently. I fought to regain control, but it was too late. We skidded off the road, crashing through a thicket of bushes and coming to a halt against a tree. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I could hear Chris and Mark groaning in pain. We were trapped, the Jeep wedged between the tree and the bushes. And the wampus cat was closing in. The world spun. My head throbbed. The smell of gasoline and pine needles filled the air. I could hear Chris moaning, Mark cursing. We were alive, but for how long? I fumbled for the flashlight in the glove compartment, my hand shaking uncontrollably. The beam flickered to life, cutting through the darkness inside the car. Chris was slumped against the dashboard, blood trickling down his forehead. Mark was groaning, clutching his arm. I looked at myself, a few cuts and bruises, nothing serious. We were lucky to be alive. But the wampus cat. I slowly turned my head, shining the flashlight towards the back window. The creature was there, just outside, its eyes burning like hot coals in the darkness. It was sniffing at the shattered glass, its claws scraping against the metal. It was trying to get in. Panic surged through me. We were trapped, injured, and this thing, was about to tear us apart. I looked around frantically for something, anything, to defend ourselves with. A tire iron? A rock? There was nothing. Then I saw it. Mark's hunting knife. He'd brought it along, just in case, he said. It was lying on the floor of the car, glinting in the flashlight beam. I lunged for it, my fingers closing around the cold, smooth handle. The wampus cat roared, a sound that shook the car to its foundations. It lunged at the window, its claws shattering the remaining glass. I screamed, raising the knife in front of me. The creature hesitated, its eyes fixed on the blade. For a moment, we were locked in a stalemate. Me, a terrified kid with a hunting knife, and this monstrous creature from my nightmares. Then, with a snarl, it lunged again. I closed my eyes and swung the knife blindly. I felt it connect with something soft, something warm. There was a sickening thud, followed by a high-pitched screech. Then silence. I opened my eyes, my heart pounding in my chest. The wampus cat was gone. The only sound was the dripping of something thick and viscous onto the floor of the car. blood. It's blood. I had stabbed it. I had actually stabbed the damn thing. Relief washed over me, followed by a wave of nausea. I looked at the knife in my hand, the blade coated in dark, sticky blood. I had just killed something. Something terrifying. Something unnatural. But as the adrenaline faded, a chilling realization dawned on me. The screech, it hadn't been a screech of pain. It had been a screech of rage. And it hadn't come from outside the car. It had come from inside. The screech echoed in my ears, a sound of pure, animalistic fury. I whipped around, shining the flashlight towards the source of the noise. And then I saw it. Chris. Or what was left of him. The wampus cat, it hadn't been outside the car. It had been inside, all along. It had somehow squeezed itself into the back seat, silent as a shadow. And now, it was tearing Chris apart. His screams were cut short by a sickening crunch. Blood splattered across the dashboard, the seats, my face. I watched in horror as the creature ripped into Chris's flesh, its claws tearing through muscle and bone. His screams turned to gurgles, then to silence. Mark was screaming too, his voice raw with terror. He was trying to kick the creature, to push it away, but it was no use. The wampus cat was too strong, too fast. It turned its head, its glowing red eyes fixing on Mark. Its jaws opened, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. I couldn't just sit there and watch. I had to do something. But what? The knife, it was still in my hand, coated in the creature's blood. Maybe I could. I lunged forward, screaming, and plunged the knife into the creature's back. It roared in pain, its claws raking across Mark's face. Mark screamed again, a high-pitched, desperate sound. The wampus cat turned on me, its eyes blazing with fury. It swatted me aside like a fly, sending me crashing against the driver's side door. I felt a sharp pain in my ribs, a sickening crack. I couldn't breathe. The creature lunged at me, its jaws wide open. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But it never came. Instead, I heard another screech, a sound of pain and surprise. I opened my eyes and saw Mark. He had somehow managed to grab the tire iron from under the seat. He was swinging it with all his might, smashing it against the creature's head. The wampus cat roared again, but this time the sound was weaker. It staggered back, its claws tearing at the air. Mark kept hitting it, again and again, until the creature finally collapsed, its body going limp. We were both panting, covered in blood and sweat. The car was a wreck, the windows shattered, the seats ripped to shreds. Chris was gone. But we were alive. We had survived. For now. The silence in the aftermath was deafening. My ears rang, and the only sound I could hear was the ragged rasp of our own breathing. Mark was slumped against the back seat, his chest heaving, blood streaming down his face. I could barely move, my ribs screaming in protest with every breath. We just stared at the mangled corpse of the wampus cat, its fur matted with blood, its eyes still glowing faintly in the dim light. It looked smaller now, almost pathetic. But the carnage it had wrought was undeniable. Chris. I couldn't look at him. Couldn't bear to see what that thing had done to him. The smell of blood was thick in the air, making my stomach churn. We have to get out of here, I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. Mark nodded, his eyes wide with shock. He fumbled for his phone, but the screen was cracked and the battery was dead. Mine was no better. We were stranded, miles from civilization, with a dead thing in the back seat and a dying friend bleeding out beside me. We have to get help, Mark stammered, his voice trembling. I tried to sit up, but the pain in my ribs was excruciating. I could feel something wet and sticky under my hand. Blood. My blood. I can't. I gasped, my vision blurring. Mark looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate kind of fear. He reached for me, his hand shaking. We'll get through this, he said, his voice cracking. We have to. But even as he said the words, I could see the doubt in his eyes. We were both injured, exhausted, and traumatized. And we were still trapped in those woods, with the shadows closing in around us. Then, Mark's eyes widened. He was staring at something behind me, his face pale with horror. What is it? I whispered, my voice catching in my throat. He didn't answer. He just pointed a trembling finger towards the back window. Slowly, I turned my head. And that's when I saw it. The scratches. Deep, claw-like scratches on the roof of the car. As if something heavy, was climbing on top of us. And then I heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural, coming from directly above us. The growl of the wampus cat. But we had killed it. Hadn't we? The growl ripped through the silence, a guttural sound that vibrated through the very frame of the wrecked Jeep. My blood ran cold. It couldn't be. We had killed it. Hadn't we? Mark was frozen, his eyes wide with terror, his mouth agape. He looked like he was about to scream, but no sound came out. I could feel my own heart hammering in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. The growling intensified, and the car began to shake. Something heavy was moving on the roof, its claws scraping against the metal. I could hear the sickening crunch of metal bending under its weight. We were trapped, injured, helpless. And then a thought struck me, a desperate, crazy thought. The weakness. Mark's research, he had mentioned something about a weakness. Fire. I gasped, my voice hoarse. It's afraid of fire. Mark blinked, his eyes unfocused. What are you talking about? The wampus cat. I yelled, struggling to sit up. It's afraid of fire. We need to start a fire. He seemed to snap back to reality. His eyes widened, and he scrambled for his backpack, rummaging through it frantically. I think I have a lighter. He pulled out a battered Zippo lighter, his hand shaking so badly he could barely flick it open. The flame sputtered and died. He tried again, and this time, a small, flickering flame ignited. The seats, I yelled, pointing to the ripped upholstery. Use the seats. Mark hesitated for a moment, then lunged towards the back seat, his eyes filled with a desperate kind of determination. He held the lighter to the torn fabric, and with a whoosh, the seat erupted in flames. The creature on the roof roared in anger and pain. The car shook violently as it scrambled to get away from the flames. We could hear its claws scraping against the metal, desperate to escape the searing heat. The fire spread quickly, engulfing the back seat and spreading towards the front. The heat was intense, and the smoke filled the car, making it hard to breathe. But we couldn't stop now. We had to keep the fire going. Mark grabbed another piece of fabric and threw it onto the flames. The fire roared even louder, and the creature's screams intensified. It was working. The fire was driving it away. But how long could we keep this up? The car was going to be engulfed in flames any minute now. We had to get out. But how? I looked around frantically, searching for an escape route. The windows were shattered, but the doors were jammed. We were trapped. And then I saw it. The sunroof. It was small, but it might be just big enough. Mark, I yelled, pointing towards the sunroof. We have to get out through the roof. The sunroof. It was our only chance. Mark, his face smeared with soot and blood, scrambled towards the front. He kicked at the sunroof, the glass cracking and splintering. Another kick, and the whole thing caved in, shards of glass raining down on us. Go! Go! I yelled, pushing him towards the opening. He hesitated, looking back at me. What about you? I'm right behind you. I lied, wincing as I tried to move. My ribs were on fire, and I could barely breathe. There was no way I was getting through that opening. Mark didn't argue. He scrambled out onto the roof of the car, disappearing into the smoke and shadows. I watched him go, my heart sinking. He was going to make it. He was going to be okay. But what about me? The flames were licking at the dashboard now, the heat becoming unbearable. I coughed, my lungs burning with the acrid smoke. I had to get out. Now or never. I reached for the handle of the driver's side door, pulling with all my might. It was jammed, stuck tight. I pulled again, harder this time, putting all my weight into it. The metal groaned, and the door creaked open a few inches. Just enough. I squeezed through the narrow opening, ignoring the searing pain in my ribs. I stumbled out of the car, collapsing onto the ground. The fresh air hit me like a wave, and I gasped for breath, my lungs aching. I looked up and saw Mark. He was standing on the edge of the clearing, silhouetted against the firelight. He was waving his arms, yelling something I couldn't hear. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I crawled towards him, my hands scrabbling at the rough ground. The flames were roaring behind me, consuming the car, the creature's corpse, everything. I was almost there. Just a few more feet. And then I heard it. A low growl, deep and guttural, coming from the shadows behind me. The wampus cat. It was still alive. The growl sent a shiver down my spine, a primal fear gripping my heart. I turned, my body screaming in protest, to face the creature emerging from the shadows. Its fur was singed and matted, its eyes burning with an even more intense fury than before. It was wounded, but far from defeated. Adrenaline surged through me, masking the pain in my ribs. I scrambled backwards, desperately searching for a weapon, a rock, a stick, anything. My fingers closed around a jagged piece of broken glass from the shattered car window. It was a pathetic excuse for a weapon, but it was all I had. The wampus cat lunged, its claws outstretched. I screamed, raising the shard of glass in a desperate attempt to defend myself. The creature swiped at me, its claws tearing through my flesh, leaving deep, bloody gashes on my arm. I cried out in pain, but I couldn't give up. I had to fight. I lunged forward, thrusting the glass towards the creature's face. It roared in anger, its jaws snapping shut just inches from my hand. I felt the hot, fetid breath on my skin, the stench of blood and decay filling my nostrils. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. Mark. He was holding a large branch, its end sharpened to a point. He charged at the creature, screaming, and plunged a makeshift spear into its side. The wampus cat roared in pain, its claws raking across Mark's chest, tearing through his shirt and drawing blood. But Mark didn't falter. He held onto the spear with all his might, twisting it deeper into the creature's flesh. The creature thrashed and snarled, its claws tearing at Mark's arms and face. But Mark held on, his face contorted with a mixture of pain and determination. He was fighting for his life, for both our lives. And then, with a final, desperate roar, the wampus cat went limp. Its body slumped to the ground, its eyes dimming, its breath rattling in its throat. It was dead. Finally dead. Mark collapsed beside the creature, his body shaking, his breath coming in ragged gasps. We had done it. We had actually survived. But as I looked at Mark, his face pale and bloodied, his body covered in wounds, I realized that the ordeal was far from over. We were both injured, exhausted, and miles from help. And even though the wampus cat was dead, the fear remained. The fear of the darkness, the fear of the unknown, the fear that something else, something even more terrifying, might be lurking in those woods. As we stumbled through the darkness, our bodies aching, our minds reeling, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That something was out there, following us, waiting for its chance to strike. And as the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor, I knew that we would never truly escape the horrors of that night. The wampus cat might be dead, but the nightmares would live on.